Pretty excited to be here talking to this because just a week ago I was in St. Martin talking about a similar topic about where we are going in IT, specifically IT security, and what the bad guys are going to attempt to do to us. Now, I come to information security from a law enforcement and intelligence background, and I have some claims to fame of talking about, 250,000 Soviet troops on the border of Afghanistan, saying they're probably not there for sightseeing. And making such sort of, I'm going to say, analysis and looking forward into the future. So when CREST and IISP came to me and said, Ian, we'd really like to hear your thoughts about what we're going to do, how this industry is going to change, what it's going to be like for us, I kind of put my crystal ball together, and I hope that you'll enjoy that. I think some other things have really come out in the security community in that we're seeing a blend of everything coming together. And this is going to prove immensely challenging, especially for those of us that are, strongly familiar with Windows 2000 and Windows 2003. Our skill sets are slowly fading, and there are new skill sets, cloud and stuff like that are coming at us. I've been working a lot with the UK Cyber Defense Challenge for Cyber Titan in Canada, for Cyber Centurion in the UK, thinking about a scenario that encompasses all aspects of cybersecurity. And, I'm pretty excited about the snap election that is going to occur, because I'm excited about which candidate Vladimir Putin is going to decide is going to win. So there's my joke. I'll throw a few into it. First thing in the morning, we need a little bit of humor to see us through our day. I'm thinking about a lot of things right now, and some of the numbers, we're going to talk a little bit about numbers to give you some context. The security industry itself is going to undergo a gigantic surge in growth, and we can see that it's projected to be $170 billion by 2020, according to Forbes. Unfortunately, Forbes is also predicting that cybercrime will be $2 trillion. And to sort of give you a parallel, $170 billion industry taking on a $2 trillion cybercrime industry, it's sort of like the USS Eisenhower going up against a rowboat. We're going to have a great deal of difficulty. And those losses, those $2 trillion of losses, are going to be shifted around between businesses that are cyber secure and businesses that aren't cyber secure. So that is sort of the one thing that I'm really thinking about. And then to give you some context about those giant numbers, the entire value chain of the internet is projected to be about 5.8 trillion. So if you are losing about 33 cents roughly on every dollar you're making online because of cybercrime, that, my friends, is the problem. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. We've seen some recent developments, especially with botnets and massive denial of service attacks. And I listed a few of the ones that I found particularly interesting. And to give you some context, we've already had the first use of a cyber weapon of mass destruction, right? What we saw was 900,000 Deutsche Telekom customers pushed off the internet. Now, that was in itself an interesting situation, because that was sort of like indiscriminate. All of those people were knocked off the internet at about the same time. Now, fortunately, in that particular attack, a reboot put everybody back on the internet. So it wasn't like catastrophic. But then we see in April something called BrickerBot came out. And BrickerBot specifically targets IoT devices that have vulnerabilities and renders them broken. Like permanently broken, like no actual reboot, get things back online. So if you look at where the trend is going, unfortunately, we're back to 1998's Chernobyl virus, which was a BIOS level attack virus, packaged with a massive botnet. We now have a weapon system capable of removing a whole bunch of people from the internet at one time. So when we think about that, and we think about our internet connection, in the world of ICS and SCADA and controlling transportation networks, critical functions such as power and hydro, unfortunately in 2018, my first prediction, along with many other IT security pundits, is an attack on ICS infrastructure that yields a mass casualty incident. Now, this might be combined with a kinetic event, such as a hurricane, an earthquake, to enhance the actual damage of that kinetic event. But unfortunately, where we are right now in the ICS autonomous system world, in the United States and UK, I think we're actually going to be okay. Where this is really going to play out is in nations where we've either handed our old technology to them and said, good luck, good luck securing that 2003 box. And we've said, okay, you can start building your national infrastructure based on the hand-me-downs from the G20 nations. This is where I think we're going to see the most potential damage as we go on. And up there's a graph of what the ICS critical vulnerabilities are. And I think if we can manage to play this video, a pedestrian or a driver who is following the rules, and as you can see, that is an Uber vehicle that just blew that red light. So the reason I wanted to put this particular picture up there is 5 years in the future, what happens if they all decide to run red lights? And this is where you now get people hurt, you get other vehicles colliding. And we'll talk a little bit about why that becomes important in the landscape that we have in the future. And just to give you an idea of where we are right now, about 50% of the vulnerabilities found in ICS systems lead to complete compromise of those ICS systems due to vulnerabilities. And unfortunately, patching and updating ICS systems is incredibly difficult, mostly because you can cause catastrophic failure if you take systems offline, and also because it's an incredibly expensive process, because in a lot of cases, not only do you have downtime, but there is a lot of questions about whether or not the systems will come back online, and whether or not that actual skill set to start things up again exists. And we've seen some of these attacks exploited in real life with the explosion of a ThyssenKrupp smelting plant in Germany, which exploded as a result of a vulnerability in its ICS SCADA system. So I'm saying that somewhere around 2019, things are going to come to a head. And I think most of the problems are going to happen, like I said, in those non-G20 countries that have an incredibly vulnerable infrastructure, national critical infrastructure. And we've already seen a number of different type of events, and I wanted to highlight a couple of them. We've seen what a total destruction of a company's infrastructure with the Shamoon and Shamoon 2 viruses that were unleashed on Saudi Aramco. There is some question about whether or not we had a pipeline explosion attributed to cyber attack. There was a Forbes article that proclaimed that this was a wireless vulnerability that was exploited by bad guys. And then a whole bunch of researchers came and said, well, that maybe not be the case. So there's some questions about that. What there is no question about, in 2013, hackers broke into the Israeli transportation system and decided to turn the green lights on at both ends of a tunnel. Okay? Now, interesting attack, and really, the nice thing to note there is that, nobody was killed in this instance. However, imagine, if you will, that you did this during a national emergency situation or an impending attack, and then you decided to mess with the transportation network of the Israelis. This is where you now get that kinetic effect and the cyber effect coming together. And we've seen this in the Georgian war. We've seen this in a number of occasions, and probably the most recent example is how in the Ukraine, the lights went out in some strategic areas because of a power plant vulnerability. So this is what cyber war looks like. For most of us who are not caught up in that imminent storm, we will have inconvenience. So cyber war for us will be inconvenient, but it won't be catastrophic. In other countries, I can foresee a situation where it could be catastrophic, especially if, for instance, desalinization plants were targeted in a Middle East area that's suffering from a drought. So when you take all of these things together, you can create a situation which will be incredibly uncomfortable as a result of vulnerabilities in critical infrastructure. I wanted to take a minute right now to talk a little bit about a guy named Trick, a hacker named Trick, who was with Team Poison before he joined the Cyber Caliphate. And he was responsible for some really interesting attacks where this is a bunch of non-nation state actors who perpetrated denial of service attacks, malware outbreaks, ransomware attacks in order to fund cyber caliphate operations. The reality is that the skill set of our adversaries who are not enchanted with our particular way of life is gaining tremendous ability. The problem is that at scale, the attacks that they can unleash can have detrimental effects. And we talked about the Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center, which got a ransomware attack. It took them about a week to 10 days to sort that out and get systems back online. They lost a tremendous amount of money in the United States because their healthcare system is a for-profit one. And the point, though, to this is, in the event of a national emergency, can you imagine a situation where all of the hospitals are attacked by ransomware simultaneous with some sort of kinetic event? So again, when we see these cyber attacks, we have to think about the worst case scenario is when events combine themselves and we end up with a very dangerous situation. So because of this particular danger, I feel that we are going to have something like a cyber weapons treaty. And I know that just yesterday, Microsoft released a bunch of documents of what they're calling a Cyber Geneva Convention. How to do cyber warfare, but how to do it appropriately. And interestingly enough, there's a manual floating out there from Talon that talks about cyber warfare, what you can do and what you can't do. The problem that we have is holding people accountable for their actions in cyber because, as you know, attribution is an incredibly difficult process. So, claiming that it's the Russians or claiming that it's the Chinese is not necessarily accurate, especially when we see the link between the Lurker malware group and the NSA, who Symantec proclaimed that, wow, the tools that were just dumped in one of these recent releases looks a lot like the tools that the NSA used. So we have a huge problem in attribution. And that sort of brings us to the other problem that we have. It's not the fact that nation states and non-nation states can conduct cyber war. The problem is that our infrastructure are not only the casualties, but also the proxies for that particular war. So we've seen from the revelations from Snowden, the shadow brokers, WikiLeaks, all of these offensive cyber tools. And we are actually struggling. Malware vendors in particular are struggling. The anti-malware industry is struggling because these are being weaponized incredibly quickly. If you're familiar a little bit about Apache, it's a web server that's used. All sorts of web applications are built on it. It had a vulnerability in one of the modules called struts. And anyways, this was weaponized by the bad guys in a period of 4 or 5 days and then started tearing through the internet using those servers to proxy attack other people and land ransomware. So we're now seeing an incredibly quick adoption of a vulnerability into an exploit. And this is not being done by nation-state actors. This is being done by cyber criminals. The problem that we have right now is the distance between cyber criminal and nation-state actors, especially in countries like China and Russia, is almost nuanced. So where are we going? I think that the cyber warfare treaty in the future will be because of general data protection regulation like legislation, but also because the internet is a world problem. And approaching the problem from the perspective of a nation state, the not in my backyard philosophy that many nation states are adopting is prone to actually introducing a new vulnerability because the attacks in a lot of cases are coming from different places and in fact within your own organization. There was a statistic that came out a while back that about 45% of all the hostile malicious domains are actually registered in the United States. So when you interpret that data, you can see that perhaps the United States is also at the top of the leagues when it comes to cybercrime versus the Russians and the China, an uncomfortable reality. Now, because we always like to do things in two, we're going to have the treaty, but then it's going to get violated because most treaties do, and we're going to go to war again. But this one will be different in 2021 because, well, we haven't been kind to robots. And robots and AI are what I'm going to call the unknown harbinger of potentially our own doom. Now, I put in sort of a little bit of anecdote there. Elon Musk, if you're thinking about the future, you really have to follow some of what he's doing. We're going to talk a little bit about him. But I can imagine Elon and Shane Legg hanging out at a party going, you know, I think that new data science girl, she's amazing. I think we should go up to and talk with her. And then Shane will come out with something like, I think human extinction will probably occur and technology will likely play a part in this. I don't think the relationship potential there was greatly enhanced by Shane's comments. The point that I'm trying to make with this particular situation is we are starting to explore unknown areas of technology. Specifically, there was an announcement about 2 days ago, DeepMind has learned how to think. It's an AI program that Google has been running, and they announced that it's learned how to think. My concern is, think of what? Exactly. So we're going to play another little video here. It's kind of cute. I don't know if you've seen this one, and we'll get our AV guy to roll this one. So the question becomes, and this is really the interesting story part of it, is after it did it once, it was brought back to the lab and had its firmware reloaded, and then it did it again. So there are some areas that we're thinking about right now that are going to be completely disruptive. Given that kind of situation where we're not exactly sure what we're making, and what its impact is going to have on us humans, this is where I see people going onto, I'm going to say, platforms that are very controversial. And I can't blame anyone for this. And I put two little photographs up here that I want to talk just a little bit about. The first one is a ship, a cargo ship that is going all over the world delivering plywood. Now, the interesting thing about this ship is it is captained by one guy. And he probably sleeps most of the time because the system is completely autonomous. We used to have ships that, had maybe, back 100 years ago, we probably had ships with 30 or 40 or 50 crew in order to get it from point A to point B. Now there's one guy. Okay? The other thing that was interesting about this is because all of the payloads are uniform size, there's one guy that loads this entire ship with a group of autonomous forklifts, okay? So here's the problem. We used to have an industry that employed several, potentially 100 people, and now we're down to 2 guys. And this is also why I put the Domino's Pizza robot delivery system that they're trying out is, again, one of the more popular activities for especially folks just coming up, going through high school or whatnot, is working for the service industry and delivering pizzas. Well, that opportunity might be taken away, and that's a problem. And it becomes such a problem that in this particular case, this was a court action filed against a robotics company because the robot killed someone. So that's an interesting situation where we have a robot taking out somebody, and we're just exploring what the liability questions are around that. And then we have a press announcement from General Motors suggesting that they've won great opportunities by putting 30,000 of their robots on the internet. I just hope that they all don't, get onto their own same Slack chat channel and start plotting our demise. So my last name, unfortunately, is Trump right now, and I don't know if you know this, but going into the United States with the name Trump is actually great because you get like pre-check without even asking, for it. They're like, oh no, sir, you don't have to take off your shoes, which is really good. So when I tell you that global warming is a problem, you can say, well, there's another Trump that thinks that global warming is actually a thing. So when we look at what's going to happen when we combine robotics and global warming, we have a society that becomes very destabilized. So looking at the trend analysis, we see that industrial robots are expected to rise 4.5 to 6 million by 2025. And there's a reduction in wages because of industrial robots, and one robot replaces about 7 workers on average. So when we look at where we are right now, we have a combination of the global warming, which is going to cause a potential problem with 20 million people in Yemen and in Africa, and we're also not going to give them jobs. So this is going to be a problem. This is why we're going to partition the internet at some point. And this actually plan has been around for quite some time. But we have a problem about identity. I don't know if you know this, but one of the biggest problems that we have is people stealing credentials. So guys like Elon Musk really want to connect the human brain to the internet so that you are your own identity. And we have a long way to go before this. So here's the problem. The human brain, as it turns out, is an actual supercomputer, way more advanced than anything that we've built so far. And I put in some of the interesting statistics about it, that we basically have tried to mirror the human brain in computer terms and found that we needed like 83,000 processors in order to do that. We don't have that many cores on our Intel or AMD products yet. And that we're talking about petabytes of storage and terabytes of transfer speeds. So it'll be a while before we manage to connect the human brain and solve this partitioned internet problem. And this is why a lot of folks have been talking about, a secure network. There's been an admission from some of the grandfathers of the internet at the RSA conference that as a result of all these devices that are unmanaged, that are coming online, the potential of AI to explode out of its box, that we're going to need some rules. We're going to need some sort of security on that. That kind of concludes our second cyber war, where we're not even sure who the bad guys are, but the bad guys could be actually invented by us. So I talked a little bit about this trusted network, this new thing that's going to emerge from the rubble of the old network. And it's probably going to happen as a result of economic models that are going to just die. So imagine, if you will, the world of autonomous vehicles. Why would you even purchase a vehicle anymore? Well, there's an entire financial industry built on the assumption that at some point you're going to need a car in your life, and you're going to borrow money, and then you're going to pay back that money. In the majority of cases, some people just steal it and sell it in the Middle East. But the point being is that we have an entire basic economic model built on the consumption of our transportation. Well, when you combine things like solar power, wind power in order to power our vehicles, we now get into a situation where we have the ability to have almost free transportation, or use as we go, renting a small portion of it. This is going to set the financial models that we have on edge. I think what we'll see is the emergence of a new trusted network to do a number of different things. As an example, as an Uber, if Uber knows who you are and perhaps you have some problems, one of the biggest solutions would be to introduce Uber into Syria, and then when the president of Syria uses an Uber, instead of taking him to his destination, you could take him to the International Criminal Court, for instance. So this is another problem that we have with the privacy, is that perhaps you've been somewhat negligent. Rather than getting to your destination, you could be delivered to the police. We're going to have an emergence of, I think, new and interesting professions around dealing with AI. and getting AI to do what we want. One of the biggest problems we have right now is, other than really turning off the power, which could be catastrophic if that AI is making decisions at business speed to keep your business processes running, we could have a catastrophic meltdown if we just decided to switch AI off. This is a problem because at some point AI may not do what you want it to do, okay? And when that happens, how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to argue with the computer and say, no, I did not want Chinese tonight. You want Chinese tonight? It's funny to think about it in that sense with Alexa and Burger King and ordering that and having all the connected devices give you the Wikipedia entry for a Whopper. But when we think about it in the case of your healthcare, it becomes a little bit difficult. I also think that the idea that AI will then create more AI to do things is a potential problem as well. And we're going to have difficulty, I think, sometimes with that interface between our brains and the network. And that's why planetary area networking will be a thing. So I think that we're now pushing into the realm of science fiction, but I think realistically we are going to have a presence on another planet, be it the moon or Mars or some other really cool place like Enceladus, I think, where they discovered an ocean and potentially life. I just hope that life isn't more intelligent than us, and then once we've discovered it, they go, hey, nice planet. Anyways, I think what we're going to do, though, is if we are talking about life and death, if we were talking about colonies where, the very atmosphere that you live in, we cannot have an untrusted network there, okay? We cannot have, the ability to shoot something and have it open the airlock. This sounds to me like a very, very bad and dangerous idea. So here is the biggest problem that I have about the trusted network, is because sometimes we absolutely want the trusted network, right? For like banking and financial information. But other times we want complete privacy and anonymity about what we're doing, okay? And as an example, in the recent American election, I'm sure that the presidency would love a list of everybody that voted against him. And that's one of the problems if your vote is actually tied to your identity. Conversely, some people are very happy to give that information away and they're very happy to vote. But the problem here is we need both. We need an untrusted network and we need a kind of, I'm going to say, a Wild West network. And never the two shall meet. And that, I think, is going to be the most difficult problem that we have. Another problem is that the old softies at the European Parliament feel that things like AI and robots might deserve rights. This is another problem that we need to figure out, is because at some point, if you create artificial intelligence, there are folks that believe that that is now an entity itself and it's deserving of various protections under the law. So this now becomes where we are now going to protect autonomous systems, we're going to protect ourselves, and we're going to be caught in this horrible middle place of what happens when an autonomous system disagrees with you. So where we really need to think about is we may have an opportunity because of this particular event. So we talk about cybersecurity attacks and we talk about all of the terrible things that could be done over an internet connection, or if, God forbid, we do wire our minds to it, or we let robots run amok. The reality is we have a giant reset switch in that glowing globe that we see in the sky, sometimes through the murky clouds of London. The reality is that the sun is capable of pushing us all the way back to, well, kind of the Stone Age with what's called a coronal mass ejection event. Now, unfortunately, Peter Riley, who might have taken his social networking skills from the same Elon Musk dude, suggests that there's a 12% chance in the next decade that we're going to get the massive reset switch because of such an event. And in fact, we saw one in 2012, which actually didn't hit the Earth, but was believed to have been a catastrophic ejection. And the last one that we had was in 1859. This is where basically a massive surge from the sun comes in and stomps all over your networks, stomps all over your hydro, and pretty much turns us back into the do-over, if you will.